welcome to another edition of the Energy Podcast. Ryan Ray alongside the energy wizard herself, Ellen Wald. Ellen, how's it going?
I'm a wizard. Excellent.
How is it going, Dr. Energy?
Oh, Dr. Energy is good.
I was picking up on the Harry Potter theme a few weeks ago. So
yes.
I'm
going to cast my spell.
Well, I am, and I guess Nate's releasing the video of this. I don't know. We are in the new studio trying to get it set up but here today. So if the audio sounds a little bit differently, blame Nate, who's over there off the screen. If it sounds great, then thank me for this brand new studio. It just kind of depends on. And Ellen, we can just lump you in there as well. Just blame Nate or thank you. However you want to parse that out. Busy show today, a lot to discuss, and we're going to lead off with a story that we. It's funny. Last week, we said, hey, there's a report that like 40% of the capacity is back online. The rest could be back on really quick. And then today we have a report from the Journal. Aramco's repairs could take months longer than company anticipates. Contractors say... is contractors better than sources? I don't quite know, but
I think we need an official hierarchy of sources here. Is
right.
Contractors higher than officials? And how does it compare with people familiar with the matter?
Exactly. So, yeah, sources close to contractors are telling us that.
I'm talking to people familiar with the sources who are close to the contractors, actually.
Right. So what do we make of this? Will Aramco be down for months and months on end, or do we think, no, they've actually got a handle on this like they said they did a week ago?
So I think that we're parsing grammar here at this point because and I actually wrote about this in a piece for investing.com where I think we're either all speaking a different language or we're willfully ignoring the language that other people are using. So there's a difference between production, output, supply, and capacity. And it seems like everyone's kind of playing hard and fast with these definitions. So Aramco can return to normal production, and I say normal with air quotes, normal being what they were producing before this attack happened, not what they're fully capable of. They were producing 9.8 million barrels per day. They can return to normal production, but that doesn't mean that the damage has been repaired. It could mean that they have ramped up production from elsewhere and are relying on that. Their output could return to normal if you include oil drawn from storage in that in terms of what they're putting on the market. So when you talk about returning to capacity, that could take a lot longer. And indeed, I think that's what a lot of what we're seeing in this article. It says repairing the damaged units will take time, anywhere from 2 to 9 months, depending on the damage. I mean, that comes from IHS Markit, and what do they know about what's going on in Aramco? Probably nothing. But the point is that, yeah, full repairs are going to take a long time. No one doubted that. The issue is, when are they going to return to full capacity or supply or production? Not, and you have to understand that those are not the same things. So when this headline comes across and everyone's like, oh my God, it's going to take so much longer, it may not take much longer for them to return to what they're, with in terms of barrels per day that they are pulling out of the ground. It might not be the same kinds of barrels per day that they were pulling out of the ground before. But so I think that we have to be clear what we're actually talking about here. And there were reports that Brent jumped based on this headline alone. And it does seem like the market is very jumpy and looking for every opportunity to move the market based on this.
Yeah, Brent's at 64.71 right now at the time of this recording. It is up a little bit, or 64.68 just now. But anyways, so yeah, I mean, it's not going crazy, but I think you're making an excellent point there. And one of the things that I've kind of learned through doing these podcasts with you and the other ones that I do is that the news, depending on what the news is relevant to certain people because we all have a different role in the industry. And so it is hard to parse out what is relevant, why is it relevant, what the narrative you're trying to paint is. And if you're a trader, the implications of this are far different than someone like me in the space, which this really has almost no impact on me. It's interesting to follow. I'm commenting on it, obviously, but at the end of the day, my curiosity for the news is a little bit different than someone else's, which means that you value certain things more than others, and so it's hard to understand, like you're saying, when we get to these spots, are they just parsing words? Is it because they overemphasize certain things? And that's a frustration that I have with oil and gas news in general now. It seems like, hey, no matter where you go, it's really hard to understand what is actually going on because you can emphasize one thing and not the other. One of the things, and I'm curious your opinion on this in general, is that from the point, obviously, there's no human lives that lost steel that I've heard, correct? Steel, so no loss of human life, right?
Yeah, no loss of human life.
So from a strategic standpoint,
no injuries, even.
No injuries, right? Which is fascinating. But just from a strategic standpoint, where does this rank, or do you know where this ranks on like strategic targets inside of that refinery? Was this the worst possible case spot they could have gotten, kind of a mediocre strike, or kind of more of the I don't want to call it low end, but the low end systems, if you will?
So I think it's incredibly impressive in terms of the precision of the attack, because first of all, you've got to be able to hit this stuff with these incredibly precise, but also you've got to know where it is. So clearly whoever planned this knew exactly what was where. And that's almost more impressive than the ability to carry out the attack. And the Wall Street Journal has this interesting interactive thing about with using the satellite photos that were that were put out, and it's actually, I don't know, I found it a little annoying because you have to scroll through it to get to the rest of the article. But I guess if you're like into graphics and stuff, it looks impressive, but it doesn't actually tell you the answer to what you're asking, which is like, how bad was this? And it's that's not really clear because everyone's got a motive in saying what they what is worse. So there are these spheroid domes, okay, which are used to separate gas from oil before further processing. But how, and you can see these punctures on it, okay, but it's unclear how many were actually damaged. I mean, I talked to someone who said if you puncture that thing, it's supposed to blow up. So maybe it wasn't fully punctured, or I have no idea, and we don't know. And Aramco is probably not going to tell us. It's definitely, there are pictures of them repairing them. They've got all sorts of scaffolding up, and we all know that scaffolding means repair, right?
Right.
I mean, I think it's kind of ridiculous at this point for anyone other than a real specialist who knows this facility even to try to comment on it. And so I see people who are like, I saw pictures, the damage looks extensive, I don't think it'll be back for a while. Well, come on. What do you know? I don't know. No one knows.
I would love if we have a listener who is big into the refinery side of things. I am curious because what you said a minute ago, I've often wondered, you see these explosions. I know they have preventative measures, but I'm curious what preventative measures they have, because you would think there'd be a big fireball and then another big, kind of like a movie where it's boom, 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 boom. So I'm curious what kind of preventative measures, is it shut-off valves? Is it some kind of fire suppression system? I'm just genuinely curious how they do prevent everything else from just kind of going up in flames.
Well, it seems like they really, it's from some of the reporting, it seemed that crews were out there putting out fires while the attack was still going on. They didn't know what it was, but they responded to the fires, and then they saw stuff, flying through the air. So, I mean, that's kind of interesting, right?
Wow.
And I think that our guest who's coming later on may be able to shed some additional light on how this stuff works. And so it should be interesting. But I just think it's interesting that people are going to read into this what they want to read into it. And it's important to remember that what exactly, what words are being used, and whether or not you're, and what perspective you're coming to it from. So say you're coming to it from the perspective of, hey, I've got a lot of light oil I'd like to sell. Well, Aramco may not be putting out quite as much light oil on the market, even if they're putting out the same amount of oil. So maybe this is your opportunity to try to sell some of that light oil in favorable conditions, for example.
Right. Well, speaking of kind of pricing and stuff, let's go to the next piece, which is from Reuters. Oil steadies on hopes of full Saudi output restart. restart. We kind of talked about that. One of the things in this piece I don't think alludes to it, Ellen, and this was last week. It's kind of something we can put a pin in and try to follow up on here in a month or so. And last week there was an article, and it alluded to the fact that you won't see the full impact of the loss of the barrels until mid to late October. And so, because of how the Saudis had it on the ships already and all this, and so I'm curious, a month from now, rather, if we will see a big draw in the supply, and all of a sudden the traders trade the price up, even though they're predicting that now that we will see a slight deficit in the supply in a month and a half from now. So it's funny how you read these headlines and what the traders are interested in. It's why I always say I'm not really sure what they actually believe or think, because just the other day it was 40% going to be back on, but the deficit will be here. Now we got reports it might not be on. As you say, it depends on what news you parse. I think the biggest takeaway for me is that if you're one of those people who thinks that oil prices are going to skyrocket to 100, we're not there yet. It's just the news, at least from a news standpoint, the news can't drive it right now. There's just nothing to drive it.
Oh, but they're still trying. One of my favorite, the best thing that I saw, I think on Twitter today, was someone said, the market isn't taking this seriously enough. What do you mean the market? The market isn't like nefarious. The market doesn't have...
Get it together.
Yeah, like, market, take this seriously. I'm telling you, you need to take this more seriously. Well, if the market's not taking it seriously, then that means it's not serious to the market. Like, right. The market isn't, it's like hurricanes. We assign them like emotions and motives, like that hurricane headed for Tampa or something like that. Like, no, it doesn't. It's just weather.
Right.
The market doesn't have a motive here. It's just a collection of people making decisions, or computers making decisions based on what people have told them to do. So it's just kind of funny. It's like saying, like, the market's not taking it seriously enough. The market is taking it as seriously as the market thinks it should be taken. And that includes the fact that, like, we're not, there isn't great economic news coming out, and we're still in this like weird situation with China. There's still a lot of oil on the market. The Saudi Arabia is the third largest producer today, not the first. Yes, it's the largest exporter, but it's only the third largest producer. And, this isn't your father's oil market.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because we're talking on the Texas Oil Gas podcast this morning, kind of the factors that we're seeing, at least from the Texas side of things, and we kind of went through them. So if you look at the DUCs, I issued a report off the EIA data on the DUCs. The DUCs have increased somewhere around the neighborhood of like 3,800 since 2014. I think it's somewhere in that, and like 3,200 of those come from the Permian. So most of the DUCs are from the Permian. So you got this, and that's assuming that the DUC number is right, which is a different discussion. So you got this large DUC inventory allegedly out there. You have the trade China deal. You have the Aramco issue now. You have Venezuela. You have Iran, and depending on which ships fall and how they may, the market may or may not be very happy to ascribe some emotion to it. But I mean, if Trump somehow pulls out a deal, which is unlikely, with Iran before China, and barrels start coming back onto the market, the price will go down. If he strikes a deal with China, but not with Iran, and somehow suppresses Iranian barrels, then you would think the price of WTI would go up because we start selling oil. So I think the market is sitting there going, I don't know what signal to actually read right now because there's just too much in the air. Yeah, the market's not smart enough to figure it out.
Oh dear, poor Adam Smith. What's also interesting is that I definitely think we're in one of these moments, and we're still kind of waiting to see what kind of signals are going to be impressive. But on that note about what could happen come October, so I did read a report, and this seems to have kind of gotten lost, and I wrote about it in Forbes, but and it got a lot of hits, but I haven't seen any follow up from any news organizations on this. But apparently, UNIPEC, which is Chinese, the trading arm of Sinopec, sent 4 tankers to the United States to buy light crude, despite the fact that there's still a 5% tariff on American crude oil from China. And so I think it'll be interesting to see, like, if that is true. Is China going to revoke or suspend that tariff for the time being. And what's it going to look like when those when those four tankers show up in, at one of the ports in the U.S. and start filling up on light crude? I mean, like you said, what kind of draw are we going to see in the EIA that week? And our traders suddenly be like, whoa, oh my God, where'd this come from? When, if they made a bigger deal about this, they would have known.
Right. Okay, we do have a guest coming on, so we got two stories. We're going to hit them kind of quickly back to back here, both from Reuters, I believe. Yes, the first one is Saudi Arabia tells Japan's biggest refiner about possible shipment change, and then the other one, which is I saw this last week and I laughed. I shouldn't have laughed, but I laughed. I'm sorry. Mitsubishi says Singapore-based oil trader lost $320 million in unauthorized trades. $320 million. Why does it that ever happen to me? Why does someone lose that money to me? Like, I don't understand this. Like, if you're going to lose 320, Ellen, we would take 100 apiece. So they could have saved 120 million, given me and you 100, and we'd have called it a day, right?
Yeah. See, I'm dying to know, what were the bad trades? What did he trade so badly on? Did he trade badly? Do you think thought it was going up to 100 and made unauthorized bad trades for that? Or was it more of he was trying to steal the money? I mean, I feel like there's a lot more to this story, and hopefully they'll do some digging, because I want to know who this guy is and what were his. It says unauthorized trade this year. It said, he disappeared in August. Mm-hmm. So he's been missing since August, and they haven't found him.
Oh yeah, this is one of those stories that we need some sources close to the situation to report.
Yeah, could we have someone at what's it called, a PDS? What is PDS? Petro Diamond Singapore. Mm-hmm.
So. But here's what's funny. If you go to the end of the piece, it says the Mitsubishi spokesperson could not say what the impact on the trading house's earnings would be. Profit totaled more than $5 billion with a B in the year through March of 2019. So does that mean January, February, March they made $5 billion? Is that what I'm reading?
Yeah. That's wow.
So look, holler at your boy. Just give me Give me just a little bit of that money, $320 million. We could have walked away with $120 million apiece, $100 million apiece, and they could have saved $120 million.
Yeah, if this anonymous trader wants to appear on the podcast, we will give him ample time to explain his trade. We'll even use a voice. Can we use a voice synthesizer? Give him a different voice. Yeah, keep him totally anonymous.
We have had as people, not a lot, but a handful of people who've asked to come on if we change their voice and stuff. We said no, but we for this. For this, we'll make an exception. And how does the market feel about a man losing? Does the market get angry? Is the market happy? Because if we're going to give the market emotions, then this is one I'd like to know how the market feels about someone losing $320 million. And just the final thing. Isn't there stop gaps in place to prevent this type of thing? Shouldn't Ryan have so much money that he can trade, and then some kind of algorithm prevents him from, just burning through $320 million?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, Mitsubishi, I don't know anything about tech or tech security or trading, but if you want to hire me, I'd be happy to consult with you. I'm sure we can put together a coalition and prevent this from happening again.
Exactly. We need this story needs follow-up.
Yes, this one definitely needs follow-up. I know you mentioned we do have a guest coming on, but before, Ellen, I had a listener reach out. I won't give out his last name, but he is from the greater Denver area, Michael. He said he enjoys the Energy Week podcast. Keep up the great work. Connected on LinkedIn. So, Michael, thank you for reaching out. We do appreciate that. And Ellen, since we do have guests, we will be running probably up to the wire. Where will you be this week, and any other news we want to hit before we get the guest on?
Let's see. I am going to be on investing.com later this week and Forbes, and I'm also on The Hill, not the actual Hill, just the metaphorical Hill as in the news site. I have a piece coming out about natural gas and coal and why the ban on fracking or the proposed ban on fracking would actually not be very good for reducing carbon emissions.
Okay. And I'll be on the Oil and Gas Contractors Connect with Jay Young. If you're familiar with the oil and gas industry, Jay Young is kind of one of the big boys over here in DFW. Takes Oil and Gas Podcast, bring in the closers, and I'll be on a show that you have been on before, Ellen, Jackie Daly Show. So I'll be on Jackie's show. I record tomorrow, but I'm not sure when it comes out, talking about the Bush China Foundation and what we have going on there. Okay, up next we have on Devin Geoghegan, who is the Global Director of Petroleum Intelligence for Genscape. Devin, thank you so much for coming on, especially short notice. I know this kind of came together late last night, and so thank you for coming on and joining the show today.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure.
Go ahead, Ellen. Sorry.
Oh, so we'd like to start off by you telling us a little bit about Genscape and what you guys do before we get to kind of the meat of the issue.
Sure. So Genscape currently operates the world's largest private network of in-field monitors, and we distribute industry-leading alternative data that we and clients use to synthesize market intelligence across the commodity energy spectrum, including commodities like power, oil, natural gas liquids, and then maritime freight. And if you go all the way back to our origins, the company was the first ever to use power monitoring sensors that measured real-time electrical flow on power lines, which ended up changing the way that the world sees and reacts to electricity and energy markets. Today, we're now involved in many more commodities, and we've been pioneering the use of high-frequency oil detections and other technologies in multiple commodities to try and shed light on what's going on in the world.
Sounds really cool. So we talked a little bit earlier about this on the podcast, and the oil market is currently obsessed with whether Saudi Aramco is capable of meeting its ambitious repair targets for the damage incurred at its oil field and oil processing facility. And we're what light can you shed on what you see happening on the ground in Saudi Arabia in terms of production?
Definitely. So we let clients know back on Sunday, Monday, the couple days after the original attacks, that we had detected the fields producing no less than about 50% of what the original capacity was. So the Saudis ended up stating 5.7 million barrels per day had been affected. By Monday morning, we were clarifying with clients that no more than about 2.8 to 3, so about 50% was still affected. And then on Wednesday, Thursday, we also alerted clients that about 60% had returned. And along the week, we've seen a couple of the offshore fields begin to ramp production, at least through the detected signals that we use. So far, what Aramco has stated publicly, as well as some stuff reported in other media, we've been seeing and able to corroborate with the signals intelligence that we use. As to the future timeline, we're not engineers per se, so we try not to speculate, but it seems like they're motoring along and doing great work.
So that's in terms of production. So how do you see this happening? What kind of is there anything you could say about how you detect this?
Absolutely. So we use satellites that are going around the Earth every night, and those satellites measure the radiant heat or the temperature of spots of light around the Earth, everything from city lights to oil field flares to biomass fires. And what we've been able to do is we combine the data science and the signals intelligence with fundamental research on the historical production at various oil fields in the countries that we cover. And we're able to build relationships between the amount of temperature or heat that's coming off of a given oil field with the historical production. So you come up with, as it were, a flaring to oil ratio, not dissimilar to a gas to oil ratio. And we're able to identify relatively stable relationships between, again, how much temperature we see every night, and then the historical relationship back at this point more than 5 years of what a given temperature likely indicates as to how much oil is coming out of the ground. So in a nutshell, we draw a GPS fence, as it were, around a field, and like Sharara in Libya, which is their biggest field, and we literally are measuring each day and year how much heat versus the oil, and then you can bring that relationship forward.
That sounds really, really interesting. And so you're saying that everything that Aramco has said about their production is being corroborated by this observable data on the ground there. So what does that say about, I guess you don't want to speculate into the future, but so it would appear, I guess what you're saying is that even if the repairs aren't being completed in the next 3 weeks or so, that the production that Aramco has said it will bring back online is coming back online, but perhaps it's coming from different areas than it was coming from before.
So that's a good question. We see, so of the 5.7 million from the fields that were, quote, affected, to use their words, which would include the Abqaiq processing facility, Khurais, and then Shaiba. Of those fields, we see 60% plus of that original 5.7 million already flowing. And we've also detected a good portion of the remaining capacity at unaffected offshore fields having begun to slowly ramp up. So if you were to take, let's say 60% is like 3.4 million barrels a day of the affected production has returned. Maybe you can add 500 to 700,000 of offshore production to just range it. And so even though the production is of a different grade, offshore is heavier, it's coming from unaffected fields. You've got a fair good amount of crude coming back online versus what was missing after the initial attacks.
And that's interesting because, I've done a lot of close reading of Aramco's bond prospectus, and they're actually, according to what I've read, they're actually required to, they're required by law to have this 12 million barrel per day capacity, but they have 6 months to basically get up to that pumping ability. And so they actually delineate, which fields are going to be responsible for what percentage of that in the event that they are asked to go up to 12 million barrels per day. So it seems to me as though, some fields are out of commission due to the damage. And so they're now starting to ramp up from other fields, which is something that we know, or people should have known, that they have the capacity to do based on what they put forward in this bond prospectus. So perhaps they weren't totally clear exactly about from which fields this production was coming from, which I think can be expected because the press conference they gave was coming from the oil ministry rather than the company, and so I guess it's to be expected that wouldn't really delve into the more technical aspects of it. But it does seem like what you're saying is that this is how they're compensating, which is something that at least I would add is something that we should have known that they could do because that information was out there.
I think that's right. And also, there's been some misunderstanding about which fields are connected to Abqaiq and how the constraints at Abqaiq would affect. And I think now, after a week of digging, most of the media realized that Khurais is by and large not constrained by Abqaiq. So originally the ministry talked about 5.7 being affected, and then 4.9 was being processed at Abqaiq. But in the English version of the prepared remarks, as well as the oil ministry's tweets, they clarified and said it was 4.5. We found that interesting because the delta is 1.2, which is just about the actual capacity of the Khurais proper field, and then there's two small sister fields. So it makes sense. And then Aramco subsequently come out and actually stated in interviews that Khurais is processed on site. We also think that there's some misunderstandings around Shaiba, which is another field that was originally discussed as having been affected the first night, and you haven't really heard that name too much since. And we think that that field is less constrained by upcake than most expect. So we actually haven't seen that field. We haven't detected any abnormal operations at that field since the attacks, which is explained by some of the work that we've been doing this week to make sure we understood all of the logistics in the facilities.
So they are actually. So you're saying that Sheba is actually processing a lot of their oil on site before piping it out, as opposed to being sent to Opcake. And maybe people assumed that everything was somehow being sent through Opcake when it's not quite the beating heart that I guess we thought it was.
I mean, it's definitely the beating heart. It's super critical, right? But what we found, because we were also originally puzzled by the data that we detected, and we were thinking, wait a second, isn't Sheba supposed to be affected? And what we found through our subsequent research is there's the available diagrams from Aramco would indicate that Sheba goes through Upcake, and it does. There's a long pipeline that brings it there. But what we further found back in 2004 is there's literature that uses the terms crude from Sheba is partially stabilized prior to going to Upcake. And we know that Sheba is very low sulfur content. And then if you look at what the function of the spheroids, or I call them pumpkins, at Upcake do, is they depressurize the incremental or the inherent pressure of the crude stream by letting light hydrocarbon gases escape. They go up the top, out the tubes, and then they become NGLs later on. So in 2010, and then Aramco began building a massive NGL recovery facility near Sheba that was completed. So now Sheba's NGLs are extracted largely prior to getting to Upcake. So if the spheroids at Upcake are what depressurizes the crude by stripping out NGLs, and that's already happening at Sheba, then you can make the leap of faith that, or the logical conclusion that portion of the work is being done already at Sheba. And then at Upcake, after the oil goes to the spheroids, it goes to the desulfurization stabilization towers and strips out a lot of the sulfur and H2S. But Sheba crude is pretty low sulfur already. And we have other articles indicating that a lot of the gas that's processed at Sheba is already low sulfur sweet gas. So our belief is that it's being taken to Upcake and blended further downstream with grades like Berry and the grades coming out of the Upcake facility. I'll just caveat that this is a lot of digging that we've done in forensic analysis. We have yet to receive 100% confirmation from Aramco on our conclusions about how Sheba is working.
This is super interesting, although maybe I'm a little bit more interested in the technical stuff than some of our listeners. But I find this really, really super, super interesting. And let's see, Ryan, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I just want to backtrack here just a quick second. Something you said early on, you have satellites that are monitoring this. I'm curious, what impact, if any, does the explosion have on your readings? Does it, because you obviously the heat signatures are changing, stuff like that. Does that mess up your calibrations or your readings where you have to kind of, I don't want to say fudge the numbers, but kind of adjust things for a certain amount of time? And if so, have y'all kind of caught up to where the heat signature should be now?
It's a really good question. So we definitely didn't build the algorithm for missile attacks.
Right.
So there's been what we've done since Saturday, and we've done this in instances like when Venezuela had their electrical outages in February, is we shift to a manual mode. And so we take over from the algorithm, and what we do is, I'll just use Gawar as an example. We're literally looking at each temperature reading from each point of light at Gawar each night and compare it to its history. And we're able to make sure that, number one, we can geolocate that point of light and that temperature. Mm-hmm. And number two, we can make sure that it's not excess temperature coming from a fire, or, for example, if they're burning crude and that's changing the nature of the flare. So you do have signals that make it more difficult for a machine at times like this. Mm-hmm. And so that's why we shift to doing everything manual. So literally point by point by point, and do the calculations that way.
Right.
So we think that it's still very accurate. It just takes a little bit longer for us each morning.
Yeah, and on that, this kind of my second question is just for the listener standpoint, my standpoint, Ellen might be tuning in a little bit more to this. People are going, okay, this sounds really great. How long have y'all, because obviously at some point you want to check these numbers with something that the Aramco is going to publish, but how long did it take you guys to kind of get and build this database? So when you're making these, people who aren't familiar with the company, how much data have y'all reviewed historically to get you to the point where you can actually put out these predictions and folks can go, oh wow, this is with a high degree of certainty. We know this to be true.
Sure. So we have the flaring data going back to 2012.
Okay.
So that's six plus years now.
Mm-hmm.
We began working on this a couple of years ago, in terms of marrying the data science with the fundamental research.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of the field data, that's something that I've been working on for the better part of 5+ years, gathering a variety of sources. For example, in other countries, some people say the field data is unavailable. I found that in many instances, if you know who colonized the country or how the country works syntactically, you change your search methods and you actually find a lot of data in Arabic or in Farsi or other languages. So to answer your question, I mean, this is research that's been honestly put together across 5 years.
As a historian, I love that.
One thing that, Ellen, this final question, just about general Saudi Aramco stuff, because we've kind of talked about some of the stuff from the past, is I know we've looked at doing some stuff at my company in Mexico using multi-hyperspectral imagery to detect, pipelines for theft detection, leak detection. And one of the things when you go look at Aramco, it sounds like you guys have really tapped into this. Where are the pipelines? Where are they flowing to? What's going on? It sounds like you guys kind of have that data as well. So you're not just collecting from the refinery spots. You're also able to see if there was a shutdown along a major pipeline because you're either using the heat signature or some kind of change detection to look at the land disturbance. So it's not just, if I'm understanding correctly, y'all aren't just detecting what's going on at the refinery. You can also trace out the entire field and understand where everything is coming and going. Would that be a correct assessment also?
Yeah, we actually, most of our detections do come from the actual field infrastructure itself. So the gas oil separators, the GOSPs,
okay,
and other flare stacks. We occasionally will look at the refineries, but oftentimes those, if you looked all the way to the refineries on the coast, it would commingle crude grades. Okay. Mm-hmm. So we the best example is literally, let me switch countries on you. At Libya, you have Sharara. It's out in the middle of the desert, and it's the largest field they have. And there's two subfields, one that's 200 and one that's 100,000 a day. We geofence each field individually with each subfield's individual flare stacks. And so we're just looking literally what's going on right there.
Okay. This is it's kind of, it's all, you kind of nerd out on this stuff for a while.
Yeah,
It's kind of commonplace for what you guys do. One final question for me is, let's say that we talk to you guys. Is it 6 months? Is it 3 months? Is it a year? If our listeners are wanting to follow your work, what kind of lag do you guys usually see when something like this happens? Obviously, this is a rare event, but something like this happens. If they're wanting to come back and check in and say, "Hey, did we get these numbers?" What would be a realistic time frame for folks who want to connect with you offline to follow this story?
Pretty much anytime, people are welcome to contact us. We provide the data daily to our clients. Okay. So every day we're refreshing all of the numbers on Aramco or Iraq or whatnot. So we're literally every day in contact with clients, and we try to share with people as we can. So anytime.
Okay, Ellen, do you have anything else? We're good?
No, I just wanted to know if you could tell our listeners where they can find you and your business if they do want to follow along more closely on a day-to-day basis.
Sure. So you can visit genscape.com. We have landing pages where you could put in your name and contact details, and we can try and get back to you. Also, I'm on Twitter. My name at Global Oil SD. So like supply demand, but at Global Oil SD on Twitter. And we do put out information there with some lag, but we do try to be helpful on there as well.
And one last question. So how from a trader's perspective, because, we have all different perspectives on here, but from a trader's perspective, how maybe could or should traders put this kind of information and data to work for them? Is this something that they can look at in concert with news headlines, or how should that be integrated, I guess, into maybe for traders in particular?
Yeah, so most of the use cases for the data outside of missile attacks, which are thank goodness very rare and hopefully not recurring, a lot of groups will blend it with other physical information, whether it's cargo tracking or their own supply demand outlooks. And you can see if a country is producing a little bit more than they claim or a little bit less than they claim, and it helps adjust your balances, which then you can trade off of a little bit later in time, specifically in events like this or during the Venezuela outages, where there's a lot of anonymous sources and people say X or Y, and then sometimes people say X and Y, and you're left guessing. We really try to cut through the noise and just say this is what the data says, and the data is not biased. It just is what it is. And for example, you would have gone to bed seeing crude up 20% after the attacks on that Sunday night, thinking 5.7's out, and we've already communicated with you that most likely 2.9 to 3 is still online. And then going into a press conference like on Tuesday, our client, you'd be less surprised by certain things that are stated. And I think then traders can use that to figure out perception versus reality, if that makes sense, and figure out what the market expects versus what the data indicates is a highly likely version of reality, if not the reality, and they can trade appropriately or accordingly.
Awesome. That's good stuff. Genscape.com is the website. Thank you so much for coming on. Short notice. Really appreciate it. Really enjoyed it. We will link to the show note and your Twitter profile in the show notes.
Awesome. Thanks very much, guys. Have a nice afternoon.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks again to the folks at Genscape for coming on. Again, short notice. This kind of broke yesterday afternoon. Ellen was firing off Twitter DMs and emails and phone calls trying to get this done. So thank you, Ellen, for getting that set up. Nate was not doing his job, so you had to do it for him. But that was interesting. It's interesting how they can use various algorithms and flaring data and light points and stuff like this. I'm like, yeah, sure, cool.
It makes you wonder, is there anything private left in this world? Is there anything that the satellites can't see? I mean, I'm going to build myself a titanium, shelter or something in which to do my, maybe that's where the Mitsubishi trader is hiding.
Hey, yeah. How can you not find him if you can see everything? I think that is a fair question to ask.
And one of the other interesting things though is like this idea like that they're going all the way back in like historical documents to see what production was. I mean, as a historian, I'm like, I thought I was the only one who thought that stuff was interesting. And I'm sitting in the like BP archives at some random university in England looking at like, oh, hey, this is what Iran was producing in 1954 and thinking I'm the only one who thinks that is the most interesting thing in the world. Well, there's someone else out there who finds it interesting and useful. So
they release a global oil supply report. I'm curious. It's every 6 weeks. I'm curious to see how that would balance versus the other reports that we get. So if the folks at Genscape want to email us a copy, we'd be happy to give them a little publicity. Yeah, especially if you want to come on and talk about it, we can do that. And we have API on. We're equal opportunity. Yeah, the market is agnostic on that, so we're good. Yes. Okay, well we've gone over all of the important stuff, like where we will be and all that good stuff. Ellen, we will be off next week, though, if I'm correct, right? Taking next week off. Yeah. Okay, we'll be back in 2 weeks, whenever that is. That is October or something. Yeah. We'll be back. It's our last episode of October. That's crazy. September. The 7th. We're back. Yeah, we're back October the 7th. Nate's telling me in the corner over there. So our last September podcast. But we will end it on a good note because your Giants pulled out a victory somehow yesterday. Close to you as well. But yeah, exactly. It's funny because every time they're playing in Tampa, I'm like, oh, maybe I should drive across the entire state and go see them. And then I don't because I remember it's hot and it's Florida and it's outside. Oh, that's funny. And I would much rather watch them from inside in my air-conditioned television room. It is funny for you to say drive across the entire state living in Florida, how narrow that is, and be in Texas. It just doesn't have the same ring to it. No, it doesn't. You're right. Okay. Listeners, thank you so much for tuning in, and we will be back in 2 weeks. Bye.